Welcome to IADS Retail Park, a podcast by the International Association of Department Stores. Each week, we examine the decisions shaping department store retail, the strategy, the case studies, and the questions the industry is still working through. From flagship renovations to global market shifts, we go beyond the headlines to what actually matters. Nordstrom doubled its beauty floor in New York to 1,670 square meters. Macy's Herald Square is building toward 5,000. Selfridges repositioned fragrance at the entrance with 75% niche brands. Galerie Lafayette now runs beauty across 3 floors with 440 brands. John Lewis expanded Liverpool by 40%. The investment scale across the sector is unmistakable. But here's the number that matters more. Only 24% of US shoppers visit department stores for beauty discovery. Sephora and Ulta capture 71%. And that's not a gap you close with square meters alone. I'm your host, Maya, and this week's exclusive examines what department stores are actually building with these renovations, and whether the new business model can compete with what Sephora spent 2 decades perfecting. With me today is Christine, who authored this week's analysis on department store beauty. The full article is available on our Substack, and the link is in the episode description. Christine, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Maya. And that 71% figure is really where this entire story begins, because it tells us the problem isn't product availability or even price competitiveness. Department stores carry the same brands Sephora does, often at identical price points. Many have relationships with luxury beauty houses that Sephora doesn't. But when consumers want to discover something new in beauty, not repurchase something they already know, but actually discover, they've been trained over 20 years to think of Sephora or Ulta first. That's a deeply entrenched behavior pattern. And you don't change behavior patterns with a floor renovation announcement. You change them by fundamentally rethinking how you operate, who you hire, how you train, and what you're selling.
And that's what makes these investments so revealing to examine, because they represent different theories about what will actually move that 24% number. You documented several approaches in the exclusive, but let's start with the one that feels most like a direct response to Sephora, the multi-brand discovery format. Nordstrom's Beauty Bar is the clearest example, this communal testing space where customers can try products from competing brands without a sales associate hovering or tied to any single counter. Walk us through what that represents strategically.
It represents a complete break from the architecture that department store beauty was built on for most of the 20th century. The brand counter model worked like this. Estée Lauder or Lancôme or Clinique would invest in the fixture, design the counter aesthetic, staff it with their own trained beauty advisors, and own the customer relationship. The department store provided the prime real estate, the ground floor, the main entrance, the high traffic corridor, and they took margin on every sale. But the brand controlled the experience. That was an economically efficient arrangement for department stores because they didn't have to invest heavily in training, curation, inventory risk, or customer experience design. The brands handled all of that. Department stores were landlords with good addresses.
But replicating it means taking on costs and responsibilities that used to belong to the brands. You mentioned training. That's not a small shift. When you have brand-specific associates, Estée Lauder trains them on Estée Lauder products. When you have agnostic associates working across a multi-brand bar, the department store has to train them on everything. That's a completely different operational model.
Oh yeah, Maya, it is. Plus, it's more expensive. You're now paying for the space build out, the fixtures, the inventory risk, the staffing, the ongoing training across dozens of brands, and the curation of what sits on those shelves. That's why this shift is so significant. It's not just aesthetic, it's economic. The department store is taking on the full cost of operating a discovery format. And they're doing it while competing against Sephora, which has been refining that model for 20 years and has customer loyalty programs, data infrastructure, and a brand reputation built entirely around that experience. The question I kept asking while researching this piece was, can the margin department stores capture from this new model justify the investment? Especially when they're starting from a position where only 24% of shoppers think of them first for beauty discovery. The data doesn't answer that yet. These renovations are too recent, but the financial pressure is real. And that's part of why we're seeing the second strategy emerge,
which is partnerships with external operators. You documented Galeries Lafayette's French pharmacy space and Manor bringing in Sephora itself. That feels like a fundamentally different strategic choice, almost an admission that they can't build the competency in-house. How do you read those moves?
I read them as pragmatic. When Manor brings Sephora onto their beauty floor to operate sections focused on Gen Z color cosmetics and the Sephora Collection private label, they're acknowledging a simple truth. They don't have the operating competency to run a multi-brand discovery format that younger customers will actually visit repeatedly. Sephora has spent decades building that competency. They know how to merchandise it, staff it, market it, and drive repeat visits. Manor looked at that reality and decided it was better to partner than to compete badly. The trade-off is clear. Manor gives up a significant portion of the margin they'd capture if they operated it themselves, but they gain foot traffic from customers who wouldn't otherwise come to Manor for beauty. Those customers might browse other departments while they're there. They might become Manor loyalty program members. The partnership creates relevance that Manor couldn't manufacture alone, at least not quickly.
That's a replenishment category, which is critical. Beauty products run out. Customers come back. That repeat visit behavior is what department stores need to rebuild. Because apparel purchases are episodic, but beauty can be habitual. If you can get someone coming back every 6 weeks for their Bioderma micellar water or their Nux body oil, you've created a reason to return that doesn't depend on seasonal trends or new collections.
Precisely. And that's why the French pharmacy concept worked immediately, while some of the other experiments have taken longer to find their footing. Replenishment categories, reward consistency. You don't need to constantly reinvent the assortment or the messaging. You just need to be reliably stocked with the products people already know they want. That's a different value proposition than discovery, but it's equally valuable for driving traffic. What both the Manor and Galeries Lafayette examples show is that some retailers have concluded it's better to partner with specialists who already know how to run these formats than to try to build that competency from scratch while simultaneously competing with players who have a 20-year head start. That's a mature strategic decision, even if it means giving up margin.
The third strategy you examined in the exclusive was wellness and services. And this is where things get more complicated. Harrods Wellness Clinic has been running successfully since 2017. But Galeries Lafayette launched the Wellness Gallery in 2022 across 3,000 square meters with an ambitious 60% services to 40% products ratio. And then in March this year, they recalibrated it significantly. What happened there?
Well, Maya, what happened is that services at scale are expensive to operate, and they require a level of customer education and behavior change that products simply don't. When you're selling a serum or a lipstick, the value proposition is immediate. The customer picks it up, tries it, buys it, takes it home, uses it. The transaction is clean and the benefit is tangible. When you're selling a cryotherapy session, a hyperbaric chamber treatment, or a nutritional consultation, you're asking customers to understand what those services do, believe they'll deliver value, book an appointment, commit 30 to 90 minutes of their time, and pay a premium for something intangible that doesn't leave the store with them. That's a much harder behavior to drive, especially at the scale Galeries Lafayette was attempting.
And when you visited after the March recalibration, what did you see?
I saw a floor that had pulled back significantly from that original vision. The wellness language is softer now. The standalone service catalog has shrunk. Some services remain: massages, anti-aging treatments, brow and nail salons, the gym. But what really changed is the architecture of the floor. Instead of being organized around a central wellness concept with services as the primary offering, it's now organized around traditional three-wall brand shop-in-shops. Clarins, La Mer, Estée Lauder, Helena Rubinstein, Evidence. Each has their own branded space with treatment cabins embedded inside. So you can still get a facial or a body treatment, but it's tied to a brand's retail presence rather than positioned as a standalone wellness destination. The treatment cabin sits next to the product counter. The person giving you the facial is also selling you the products they use during the treatment. That's a much more conventional model, and it's frankly more profitable because the treatment drives product sales.
And the contrast with Harrod's Wellness Clinic is interesting because that's been running successfully for almost a decade without recalibrating. What makes that model work when Galeries Lafayette's didn't hold at the scale they attempted?
Harrods never tried to democratize wellness. From day one, their clinic was appointment only, closed door, expensive, and explicitly designed for an affluent customer base that already expects concierge-level service. They don't offer makeup application or skincare consultations. They offer medical-grade treatments, injectables, body contouring, cryotherapy, DNA-based personalized skincare protocols, IV vitamin infusions. They also have a dental practice, osteopathy, physiotherapy, podiatry. It's closer to a luxury medical spa than a beauty floor. And because it's behind closed doors and premium priced, we're talking hundreds of pounds per session for many treatments. The economics work for a very narrow, very wealthy customer segment. Harrods didn't need volume, they needed exclusivity. That's a completely different business model from what Galeries Lafayette was attempting.
Let's shift to satellites, Christine, because this is where the outcomes diverge most clearly in your research. Harrods' H Beauty concept has scaled to 7 stores now. Harvey Nichols opened Beauty Bazaar in Liverpool in 2012, and it closed in 2025. Both were attempting to take department store beauty into standalone formats outside the flagship. What separated success from failure?
Control and market positioning, Maya. H Beauty works because Harrods maintained extremely tight control over brand access, curation, store design, and customer experience. They didn't try to do this in central London, where rent is prohibitive, and they'd be competing directly with their own Knightsbridge flagship. They opened in suburban shopping centres, into Lakeside in Essex, Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire. The strategy was deliberate. Reach younger, local customers who aren't making the trip into central London for beauty. These are customers who might shop at Boots or Superdrug for everyday products. But H Beauty gives them access to prestige and niche brands they'd otherwise have to travel for. They brought exclusive brand partnerships, professional makeup stations, augmented reality try-on technology, regular masterclasses and events. And crucially, they kept the pricing and brand selection elevated enough that it still feels like Harrods. There's cachet in shopping at H Beauty, but they made it geographically accessible. 7 stores later, that model has proven it can scale beyond the flagship.
So H Beauty works because it's an extension of Harrods, and customers already understand what that brand represents. Beauty Bazaar was trying to be Harvey Nichols without the department store. That's a much harder proposition.
Yes, it is, especially in a regional market where brand awareness is thinner and the customer base for luxury beauty is smaller. H Beauty can open in Milton Keynes because customers there know what Harrods is. They've seen it in magazines, on TV, online. There's brand equity that travels beyond the physical store. Beauty Bazaar didn't have that same foundation in Liverpool. It was trying to build a luxury beauty destination from scratch in a market that already had Boots, Superdrug, and eventually Space NK competing for the same customer. The satellite model only works if the mothership is strong enough to support it. Harrods had the brand equity, the exclusive brand relationships, the capital to test and refine across multiple locations, and the operational expertise to maintain consistency. Harvey Nichols attempted it with one store in a regional market, and it didn't hold. That's not a failure of vision, it's a failure of resourcing and positioning.
Across all these strategies, multi-brand zones, external partnerships, wellness integration, satellite expansion, what's the common thread here, Christine? What are department stores fundamentally trying to become in beauty?
They're trying to become destinations for discovery rather than destinations for transaction. But they're trying to do it without fully dismantling the economics that made the brand counter model so profitable for so long. That tension is at the heart of every renovation you're seeing announced. The brand counter was economically efficient for department stores precisely because they didn't have to invest heavily in training, curation, customer experience design, or inventory risk. The brands handled all of that. Department stores were sophisticated landlords with valuable addresses. The new model asked them to invest in the space, train brand agnostic associates, curate assortments across competing brands, operate discovery experiences, and in some cases add service layers that are expensive to staff and maintain. That's a fundamentally different cost structure.
Which brings us back to that 24% versus 71% statistic. Even if department stores execute perfectly on every element of this new model, the multi-brand zones, the services, the external partnerships, the satellite stores, they're still competing against an entrenched consumer behavior. Changing where people instinctively go for beauty discovery isn't a renovation cycle. It's generational work.
That's the uncomfortable truth behind all this activity. And it's why I wanted to write this analysis now while these renovations are still being celebrated in the press. The renovations are necessary. Department stores cannot continue operating a format that customers have clearly rejected. But renovations alone are not sufficient to change deeply ingrained shopping behaviors. What changes behavior is consistency, accessibility, and a compelling reason to come back week after week, month after month, year after year. Sephora built that over 2 decades with loyalty programs that actually reward frequent visits, with store events and masterclasses, with accessible price points across prestige and mass brands, with associates who are trained to work across the entire floor and help you find what you need, regardless of brand. That's infrastructure, human, digital, operational infrastructure, not just square meters and fixtures, Maya. Department stores are trying to compress that 20-year evolution into a 24-month renovation cycle. Some will succeed, especially those with strong local market positions and the resources to sustain investment over time. Many will not, and the difference will come down to whether they're truly willing to change how they operate beauty at a fundamental level. The cost structure, the staffing model, the relationship with brands, the investment in customer data and loyalty, or whether they're ultimately just renovating the same business model with better lighting and nicer fixtures.
That's a sharp place to leave it. Christine, thanks for walking through this analysis with me. And for everyone listening, the full case study is essential reading if you're operating in this space.
Thanks for having me, Maya. Always good to dig into these questions together.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the IADS Retail Park. For more insights and exclusive content, follow us on LinkedIn, explore our Substack, and visit our website.